Hi, so today I'm talking about the All-Stars, the 51st faction released for Smash Up, and I'm going to do a video about a faction I've only played about 20 games with, because this way I can get this out while they're still fairly new, and a lot of players are still somewhat unfamiliar with them. The All-Stars are basically a combo deck, and they're a combo deck whatever you pair them with. Similar to Apes or Time Travelers in strategic function, they have 4 cards that target their own cards. They have 3 broken cards that they target with these cards that target their own cards, and they need to line a few of these cards up in their hand to go from average to broken in their power output. And so their 3-star cards are Ghostly Arrival, King Rex, and Square Deal. And Square Deal you usually won't duplicate. Square Deal is something where you normally play it once for a refill and it's done its job at that point, because you frequently don't fully empty your hand twice, and at that point Square Deal is no longer such a good card. But between their 4 duplicating cards, the Geek's Non-Infinite Loop, the Time Travelers It's Astounding, the Minions of Cthulhu's Servitor of Cthulhu, and the Elder Things Begin the Summoning, the All-Stars can play in one reshuffle a total of 7 combined King Rexes and Ghostly Arrivals. They have some flexibility in this because their action duplicating cards can duplicate Begin the Summoning to function as minion duplicating cards on top of a Square Deal. And this is enough to make sure that in a 1v1 game against any modern faction, they're going to come out on top if the game lasts long enough. And when I say a modern faction, I'm talking about factions from Munchkin onwards. I'm probably going to use that term a bunch in the future, just because it seems like that was the point where the playtesters really started to have a much narrower power range for factions than they had before. The big 4 factions in 1v1 are Geeks, Aliens, Robots, and Kitty Cats, and these are all significantly better than any of the candidates for the 5th best faction, and I'm not even sure what the 5th best faction is. Also, several of the factions in the Brat Pack under number 4 also happen to be old. So when we look at modern factions, we're looking at things that are much more balanced. Within this context, the All-Stars are probably the best modern faction for 1v1 and a very strong modern faction in multiplayer. Now, I'm saying they're the best, but they probably don't appear in the strongest modern 1v1 deck. That would be either Orc Warriors or Dragon Warriors. And that's a worthwhile point to know. If you have free choice of your very best possible partner factions, you can come up with a better Warriors deck or a better Dragons deck. But these 2 factions rely on having a partner faction that can fit with their strategy, whereas the All-Stars can use their 4 duplicating cards to either emphasize any partner faction strategy or emphasize whatever part of their own strategy their partner faction needs in order to succeed. And this flexibility means that average to good All-Stars decks are going to outclass average to good Warriors decks or average to good Dragons decks. All-Stars are still not going to be able to compete with big 4 factions head-to-head, but if they have a considerably stronger partner faction than the big 4 faction ends up with, they can still get their hits in even matchups against those 4 Broken Titan factions. So, besides these 7 cards I've talked about, the 3 stars and the 4 duplicator cards, the All-Stars also have 3 utility cards that help them a lot. From the Mythic Horses, they bring Friendship Power, and Friendship Power is the horse's 2nd worst action, only working out better than Sharing Power, which is truly a pile of crap as a card. But Friendship Power sucked in the Mythic Horses, mainly because the Mythic Horses had a whole bunch of movement cards, and Friendship Power moved only a single minion, and cannot move it to a base at which you don't already have a minion. In the All-Stars, Friendship Power becomes your only movement card, and the difference in terms of the threats you present to an opponent between having 0 movement cards available and 1 movement card available is tremendous. I find when I play ninjas, I find Way of Deception to be one of my strongest individual cards. Not because it's a good card, but because it's my only movement card, and it enables me to make a whole bunch of plays I couldn't make without it. Friendship Power not only gives you an only movement card, but it comes back to your hand after you play it, which is something that was almost completely useless in the context of the Mythic Horses, but in All-Stars becomes this great little ability to tack onto the card. After Friendship Power, we also have Seeing Stars, which, if you're playing primarily with modern decks, deals with the threat of Imperial Dragon. I mean, if you're dealing with modern decks, Imperial Dragon is one of the biggest individual threat minions you've got to deal with because it helps the dragon snowball. Seeing Stars specifically kills that card. But there's also several other minions that it can kill. Invader, if you're playing against old stuff. And on top of, and beyond Seeing Stars and Friendship Power, Full Moon also becomes a powerful utility card in the All-Stars faction where it wasn't all that great in Werewolves. When you add Ghostly Arrival to the same deck with Full Moon now increases the threat for how much power drop you can create next turn with your Ghostly Arrival, and this makes Full Moon a very good threat card to drop with a single minion, and be able to drop a lot of power on the next turn without having too much power in play on this turn. The other 10 cards in the All-Stars deck are all solid, which is a strength in itself because most factions have at least a little trash. When I'm saying the All-Stars earlier function like a normal faction until they start drawing combinations, I mean that if you treat something like Non-Infinite Loop as a dead card until you draw something really useful to duplicate with it, you're functioning like a normal faction, because normal factions generally bring anywhere from 1 to 4 cards that you don't really terribly want to play, and the All-Stars are bringing 4 cards that you don't want to play until you have your combo, and then they get really, really good. So the last point I'm going to make is just, if you're facing the All-Stars, if you're playing against the All-Stars, your best odds against them are that the All-Stars are a combo deck, and they're fairly vulnerable to slow opening draws. There's a number of strong factions in the game of Smash Up that have a surprisingly high variance. Princesses comes to mind. Zombies, even though you might not expect this, come to mind as a faction that will sometimes just brick draw on you. And a lot of Time Travelers decks are like this too. But in this case, if you draw a Non-Infinite Loop early and you don't have anything great to duplicate, you have a choice between giving a Non-Infinite Loop up for very little benefit or treating it as a temporary dead card in your hand. And so, even though they're a very strong faction, they take a lot of upset losses in individual games to opponents who draw a hot hand early when the All-Stars just don't have the right draws. When you play combo style, you're going to win some games by force and you're going to lose some games by force. And that's all I have on these factions after 20 games.